What if Green Day played anarcho-hardcore? This week I'll be discussing how Green Day's long-time status as a stadium rock band has led quite a lot of people to lose sight of the fact that they did start out as a legitimate DIY punk band from an often quite radical scene. And I'll also be taking a moment to appreciate MDC, the band that created the anti-Trump chant that Green Day have been using in recent years, and taking a little look at the anarchic Austin hardcore punk scene that spawned them back in the late 70s. All this and more on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi there, my name's Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. Then on Wednesdays I'll put out one of these companion videos discussing the songs and artists and genres involved in the What If video, and also sharing a bit of an insight into my recording and arranging process. The idea of my What If videos is that each week I pick a popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I happen to have to hand in order to bring that alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was American Idiot by Green Day, and tried to reimagine that as an early 80s style Texas anarcho-hardcore punk song. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster. Just before we get into talking about music, I should just get this out of the way. I don't generally go out my way to talk about politics on this channel. A lot of the time it's not super relevant, and I have no particular desire to go out of my way to alienate people unnecessarily, although I will obviously state my opinion when it comes up. But yeah, this week I kind of feel like there's no way of avoiding the elephant in the room, as this week's content was absolutely inspired by Green Day's ongoing anti-Trump stance. So there's no point treading carefully around it, really. What I would say on the subject is what's happening in the States with the Trump administration, with ICE. It's fascism, and my parents raised me to know that fascism is bad and that we should oppose it. I think Trump and all his cabinet of ghouls are just absolute monsters. Completely despicable. Every day when I look at the news, I'm just horrified by what I see. I don't want to come across like I'm some kind of Brit commenting on what's happening in the US from some position of assumed superiority, because we're very much on the way to a similar situation over here, particularly with the rise of the Reform Party with Nigel Farage. But yeah, if we're on our way to fascism, then you guys over in the States unfortunately already have it, and I can only hope that there's a way out of it and that Trump and his cronies will one day actually pay for their crimes against humanity. Well, I'm aware that I may have viewers who aren't of that opinion, and I'm not someone who goes out of their way to pick fights or antagonize people, but on this issue I don't really see any way around it. If you support what Trump's doing, if you support ICE is doing, there's nothing here for you really. So I strongly suggest, if that's your viewpoint, there are plenty of other videos out there for you to watch. This is not for you, go somewhere else. But yeah, anyway, that out of the way, let's get on with talking about music. So one thing that always amuses me, and it seems to happen very often and has been happening for years, is seeing people on the internet being surprised by Green Day not being conservative and being sort of outraged that they've got political whenever they make a statement about something. And it shouldn't surprise me really, because you see people doing the same thing with Rage Against the Machine, who are one of the most outspokenly political acts in the history of music. But nevertheless, it's still kind of astonishing that people know so little about the music that they're listening to and pay so little attention to it that they have to have it spelt out to them what the political stance of it is. Green Day, in terms of their songs, weren't always particularly outspokenly political. I guess the American Idiot album of 2004 was the first one that actually made explicit statements politically, back when Bush seemed like the most unimaginably terrible president ever. But those of us who had been around a bit longer will be vividly aware that before that, and before they broke through with the Dookie album and everything, they'd actually come from a legit DIY punk rock scene, and one that is quite a radical scene as well, which centred around Gilman Street, the anarchist core that has been a mainstay of the Northern California punk scene for decades. I mean, Green Day would be playing with all kinds of bands in that space, some of whom were very political in their music, some of whom weren't at all. But I think the actual act of being involved in that community and of playing in that space was inescapably linked to the politics of the scene. So they were really coming from a proper kind of grassroots DIY punk place, which is something that I think a lot of people lose sight of now. Both older punks who predated them and then people who've got into them later on seem to be completely unaware and quite dismissive of their punk roots, but they were very real. Before that major label breakthrough, they were on Lookout Records, which was a fantastic label, home to all kinds of awesome acts. Like probably my favourite record label for a good chunk of time there in the 1990s. It seemed like they couldn't put a foot wrong. Just operating on a completely DIY level. They came over and toured in the UK with Jail Cell Recipes, the great Wigan hardcore band, just playing these tiny little venues all around the UK, legendary shows among people who were there. And they were the real deal, whether you like the sound or not. For some people it's too poppy or whatever, but they were a legit DIY punk band. And then even when they got signed and when Dookie came out, although obviously the sellout accusations immediately followed, they definitely held on to as many of the principles from that scene as they possibly could. And I was really impressed that when they went out touring Dookie and all of a sudden they're playing arenas, the bands that they chose to take out as support acts weren't other bands that Reprise is trying to plug. Instead of that, they're taking out Pansy Division, the great queercore band that were their former label mates on Lookout. They were taking out the Riverdales, taking out the Mr. T Experience, who were one of the absolute greatest bands to come out of that East Bay scene. So though that was really admirable. And, I lost track of what they were doing way back. I don't think I've bought an album since Insomniac, because, they've branched out into other styles of music, they've expanded their sound. It's not all necessarily my cup of tea, but I've still been impressed to occasionally just see them kind of really clinging on to the principles that they started with. And the American Idiot album was one of those times that, it was a pretty bold move for a band in their position to come out with an out-and-out protest album at that time, which I guess was the first flowering of people going, oh, when did Green Day get political? And then in more recent years, as the spectre of Trump has reared its ugly head, it was really cool to see them start dropping the no Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA chant into, I think it's Bang Bang, the song that they normally sneak it into. And there are plenty of commentators who seem to think that they've come up with that chant themselves. Those of us who are old punks know that it comes from MDC, but again, they're taking something that's known only to people who are pretty deep into hardcore punk and taking it to millions of kids worldwide. So, whether or not I ever listen to any of their newer records or whatever, I still feel like they're, in that respect, definitely doing good work. I think for a band like that who absolutely don't have to make any statements, they could just sit back and count their cash and go out and play the hits, to be using their platform to actually make a stand, I think it's always the right thing to do. And yeah, I think what particularly prompted this week's video was discovering that they've been booked to play the Super Bowl opening ceremony this year, along with Bad Bunny, who's doing the halftime show, and seeing people's kind of excited anticipation of, oh, will they do something controversial? Are they going to make some kind of statement? And who knows if they will or not. I mean, I know Trump's already said that he's not going to attend. He's already stormed off in a huff, but if they do, that would be cool. It would certainly be pretty cool to see that whole stadium chanting no Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA, and I'm sure Dave Dichter of MDC would be proud to hear that as well, because it's certainly the most exposure that his band's ever had to a mainstream audience. If you don't know MDC but are interested in punk rock, I would strongly recommend going and having a little search for them and checking out some stuff, at least their first album and the associated singles around then. MDC, if you don't know, initially stood for Millions of Dead Cops, which kind of tells you a lot about the political standpoint of the band. They then, over the years, have used the initials to stand for whatever particular message they were trying to put across at the time, but that was the initial one, and that's the one that's kind of tended to stick with them most. Now, from Austin, Texas, which had a really exciting and quite unique punk rock scene in the late 1970s, early 80s. So they started out in around 1979 as The Stains, not to be confused with the East LA band of the same era. And I think under that name they released the initial original version of their great hit John Wayne Was a Nazi, which might have been backed by the original version of Born to Die, from which the No War, No KKK, No Fascist USA chant originally came. But then shortly after that rechristened themselves MDC. They were just such a wild, provocative band. Musically just so fast, furious, weird left turns in there. Not super melodic, but raw and exciting. Lyrically, extremely politically radical, and just going out of their way to cause as much offence as possible to conservative America, which is always something we like to hear. And they were just one part of a pretty amazing scene in Austin around that time. Quite a diverse range of bands who were all generally just united by radical kind of far left or anarchist politics, including like the Dicks, who had this really gutsy kind of gravelly blues punk sound, lyrics often dealing with queer themes. Gary Floyd, the lead singer, was this incredible personality, just an astonishing performer. And like the Big Boys, who blended really driving hardcore with this extremely danceable kind of funk edge, quite unlike anything anyone else had done. I mean, maybe the Minutemen came close occasionally, but it was still quite a unique thing they were doing. So it was a hell of a scene, and MDC were maybe not the most musically sophisticated of those bands, but they were certainly, I would say, the most obnoxious and probably the most aggressively sort of politically outspoken. Pro-queer, vehemently atheist, vehemently anti-cop, vehemently anti-Nazi. Yeah, their radicalism was such that they were one of very few American bands who actually released a record on Crass Records, the Multi-Death Corporation's EP, which is another absolute classic. And they're still going. I was lucky enough to see them pretty recently. The second time I've seen them, the first time I saw them, it was the original, I think the full original lineup, 20 odd years ago now. They were amazing. But then just recently they were back over and playing in Guac and Roll, which is this awesome vegan restaurant that's also a punk venue in Liverpool. Do visit if you come to the city. And unfortunately their drummer was refused entry to the country by immigration for whatever reason. It's so difficult for people to tour these days. Luckily the guy who was driving their van was also a drummer but didn't know the song, so I think they frantically rehearsed in the afternoon before the gig and somehow pulled together a set. It was so much fun. I mean, totally chaotic. There were definitely points where I think everyone was playing a different song at once, but somehow that didn't detract from my enjoyment at all. I mean, their anarchic spirit was fully intact. And I think probably partly because they didn't have time to learn any more songs. They did play Born to Die twice, so we got to join them in a No Trump, No KKK, No Fascist USA chant twice in one night, so that was pretty awesome. But yeah, definitely check out MDC, especially that first record, and also the other Austin bands, particularly the Dicks and the Big Boys. Just an amazing scene, and one that I think does tend to get a little bit overlooked when people are looking back at 80s American punk. They tend to look at, the coastal scenes and miss out some of the exciting stuff that was happening elsewhere. That takes me up to this week's alternative universe scenario. So my alternative universe this week is very similar indeed to our own, in that it's the run up to the 2026 Super Bowl, and Green Day have been announced as the performers for the opening ceremony, and anticipation starts to grow that, are they going to do some kind of anti-Trump protest? Trump's disgusted and decides he's not going to turn up at all. With the anticipation growing, the bands start to worry, what are we going to actually do? Because, we've been doing these little bits of anti-Trump protests at shows, but it's going to seem underwhelming after all this anticipation if we just do that again. They start to worry that their set's going to be a bit of an anticlimax, but then they have an idea. What if instead of just doing the MDC chant, we take another page out of MDC's book and remodel our music to capture that sort of anarchic fury of that Texas hardcore sound? They get to work on that. So it comes the day of the Super Bowl and the opening ceremony starts. Green Day are announced and they open their set with a radically rearranged version of American Idiot, starting and finishing with the Born to Die, No Trump chant. And that's the only hit they play in it, and then the rest of it is all these brand new, furious, short, sharp, angry little blasts of hardcore, which leave the audience stunned and cause a mixture between admiration and outrage across the world. And then a little bit later on that evening, news reports start coming out that President Trump has been hospitalised, having fallen off his gold-plated toilet at Mar-a-Lago whilst in the middle of an all-caps rage tweet. So it seems that Green Day have struck the first blow in the revolution. So, in attempting to turn American Idiot from just a political pop-punk song into a raging anarcho-hardcore anthem, my first step as ever was getting the isolated vocals into GarageBand and synced to the grid. This is a more complicated process than usual because I've decided to use the No Trump chant, which is from a different song, so I had to take that bit and match it to the tempo of American Idiot, edit it all in so it all kind of fit together in tempo, then speed the tempo up to MDC worthy levels so it's really kind of rattling along. That done, popped some drums on next. For the drums, I just played them straight in on my MIDI keyboard. Sometimes with faster or more complicated things, I'll just program things in and drop the notes in individually, but I really wanted it to sound raw and human and not overly artificially tightened up or quantized, so it's pretty much all over the place timing wise, but it just about hangs in there. Popped some bass on next, nothing at all fancy, just going for root notes, hammering away on them, loads of impact. Again, not worrying too much about being tight, it's more about the attitude than the tightness of the performance. Big sort of like high gain, chunky sound, and just really digging in with a pick. I should say as well, I did slightly tweak with the chords because it's a pretty kind of poppy, happy sounding song. I can't change the tone of the song that much because obviously the vocal is as it is, but just to make it sound a bit more like a hardcore song, I stuck in a couple of slightly more discordant tones in there as well, just to make it a little bit spikier. So having got the bass on there, it was then a matter of guitars. So I think there were 3 guitars on in total, 2 rhythm tracks playing essentially exactly the same thing, panned left and right with slightly different sounds. The sounds I went for were just aiming for that sort of 80s MDC hardcore sound, pretty distorted, kind of fuzzbox into a valve amp simulator, plus a chorus pedal, because a lot of those 80s punk records use chorus to kind of thicken up the guitars, so both rhythm guitars have got a fair amount of chorus on as well, just giving it that sort of 80s edge. And then there's a couple of breaks where I wanted to add a bit of lead. Quite a lot of those MDC records have some pretty great fun kind of scattershot, chaotic lead breaks, so I wanted to try and do something a bit like that. So third guitar sound, again, thick, fuzzy, distorted, noisy sound, and didn't plan what I was going to play, just dived in, kind of grabbing handfuls of notes, and did a couple of passes of those until I came up with something that sounded appropriately chaotic. And then for the video, as ever, started out by just trying to find some footage of Green Day back in the day performing American Idiot, and also separately some footage of them doing the No Trump chant from a different song. So dropped those in, edited them together. And because it's quite a short song and the performance footage was already like super energetic, I didn't really want to do too much else. So all I added was just some crowd shots from various hardcore gigs, people losing their minds at hardcore shows. So I edited some more of that in just to give more of a visual representation of the sort of aggression that we're trying to convey with this. And as a final touch, I just added right at the very end of the video a little bit of the old MDC crest they used to have with a cop and a Klansman on as two halves of the same person, but they've done a new version with Trump and a Klansman. So I borrowed that and just added Green Day into it to bring the whole thing together. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I don't often do anything this topical, but I couldn't resist the opportunity this week. As I say, I'm a Green Day fan from way back and I love that early 80s hardcore sound, so it was good fun to try and put the two things together. I'm aware I may have pissed some people off with this, but on this occasion I sort of don't care too much, because, you know, some things are more important than your YouTube subscriber count. But if you did enjoy it, please feel free to leave us a comment, like, subscribe, any of that stuff. If there's anything else you'd like me to do in coming weeks and months, any songs or artists or genres you'd like me to take a look at, do let me know. Your suggestions are always most welcome. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I'll hope to see you next time.